Welcome to the MS&Me Radio Network. The broadcast shows are for informational and entertainment purposes only. They are not designed to provide listeners with specific personal, medical, or counseling advice. Individuals with a medical issue should always consult their healthcare provider. MS&Me is not responsible for content of individual shows. The views expressed by show hosts or their guests are their own. Enjoy the show.
I'm John Strum, and this is Real Talk MS. It's April 30th, and we have a lot to talk about. And I want to start off with what I think is some exciting news about the podcast. Thanks to a generous educational grant from EMD Serono, I'll be producing episodes of Real Talk MS directly from this year's major MS conferences. And that's going to start with the American Academy of Neurology annual meeting, which gets underway in just a few days in Philadelphia. Then we'll be podcasting from the Consortium of Multiple Sclerosis Centers annual meeting, which is happening at the end of May in Seattle. And later this year, I'll be in Stockholm, Sweden, podcasting from the European Committee for Treatment and Research in Multiple Sclerosis, or ECTRIMS conference. ECTRIMS is the largest MS research conference in the world, and all of this means that we'll be producing bonus content and bonus episodes from all of these conferences. We'll be featuring more interviews with the research scientists, patient organization leaders, MS activists, and MS warriors who are so committed to raising the bar when it comes to living your best life with MS. And the easiest way to catch all the Real Talk MS podcast episodes is to download the free Real Talk MS app for your Android smartphone or iOS device. The app will automatically download the latest Real Talk MS episode. It will let you pick out and keep track of any favorite episodes when we happen to be talking about a subject that you might be particularly interested in. And the app will also make sure that you get the video content that we'll be sharing from these upcoming conferences. The Real Talk MS app is free. You can find it at the Apple App Store or the Google Play Store, and I'll include a link to both in today's show notes. I also want to mention, as we close out the month of April, that you've set another record for the number of episode downloads that we've had. I'm quite aware that with more than 700,000 podcasts to choose from, a lot of you choose to spend some of your time listening to Real Talk MS. And to those of you who listen to the podcast on your daily commute or during your workout or on your daily walk or during your lunch break, well, I want to thank you for making Real Talk MS part of your listening schedule and remind you that I never take your support for granted. I appreciate it every day. I also want to remind you that you can be my special guest on the 100th episode of Real Talk MS. Now, we're at episode 88 today, so our 100th episode will be here before you know it. By now, I know you've heard me say that I see this podcast as a two-way conversation, and so many of you have been great when it comes to your side of that conversation, whether you've sent me a suggestion about a topic that you'd like to hear more about, or offered your feedback on a specific episode of the podcast. Well, I thought what might make the 100th episode of Real Talk MS really special is if I had an actual conversation with someone from our listener community. So if you have a story about your MS journey or an interesting perspective on MS that you'd like to share, then I think you and I should talk. All you have to do is visit realtalkms.com/enter, and I'll include that link in today's show notes, and then share some information about what you'd like to talk about during our interview. You have until May 31st to get your entry in, and I'll announce the episode 100 special guest winner on the June 4th episode of Real Talk MS. Then we'll get an interview scheduled so that you can share the story of your MS journey. So here's your invitation to head over to realtalkms.com/enter and let me know what you'd like to talk about on the podcast. Today, I'm going to be talking with someone about the fight to find a cure for MS. My guest on the podcast is Yvette Brisco. Yvette is an MS activist and an MS warrior. And when Yvette talks about the fight to find a cure, well, she means it. Literally. And you'll find out what I mean by that in just a few minutes. But before we get to my conversation with MS activist and warrior Yvette Brisco, there are a few other things that you should know about. Following reports of serious treatment side effects, the European Medicines Agency is reviewing the safety data for Lemtrada, a disease-modifying therapy designed to reduce neuroinflammation and slow disease progression in adults living with relapsing remitting MS. Specifically, the EMA is concerned about reports of complications associated with immune system dysregulation, including autoimmune hepatitis and hemophagocytic lymphohistiocytosis, a cancer-like disorder that can attack several organs in the body and is caused by a systemic overactivation of the body's immune system. There have also been reports of heart attack, stroke, bleeding in the lungs, and ruptures in the arteries from the head to the neck. So, for now, the EMA is allowing patients who are already being treated with Lemtrada to continue treatment if their neurologist feels the treatment is effective. The EMA is also advising neurologists to discontinue treatment with Lemtrada in patients who show any signs of these conditions. And during this safety review, new patients will only have access to Lemtrada in Europe if they're continuing to experience MS relapses despite having already received treatment from at least 2 other disease-modifying therapies, or if they're ineligible to be treated by any other disease-modifying therapy. Lemtrada received FDA approval in the United States in 2014. It was approved by the EMA in 2013 and is currently available in 30 countries. The safety review will be carried out by the Pharmacovigilance Risk Assessment Committee, the EMA's Drug Safety Committee. And once the Pharmacovigilance Risk Assessment Committee has completed its review, it will forward its recommendations to the EMA's Committee for Medicinal Products for Human Use, which will then issue an official opinion. Taking that committee's opinion into consideration, the EMA will make a final decision that will be binding for all members of the European Union. You can find a link to the European Medicines Agency announcement of this safety review in today's show notes. Last week, an alliance made up of several health and caregiving organizations reported on the results of a survey of 2,089 family caregivers about their roles and responsibilities. The new survey shows that 25% of family caregivers are millennials between the ages of 22 and 37. And 40% of family caregivers are men. But what really struck me in this report was that about 20 million family caregivers in the U.S. perform medical or nursing tasks while feeling undertrained to do so. These tasks include managing medications, preparing special diets, assisting with mobility, providing wound care, and managing incontinence. And the survey results indicated that caregivers who perform medical or nursing tasks worry about making a mistake. And the more complex the task, the greater their worry. The report makes what I consider an obvious recommendation that healthcare professionals and social service professionals need to make a greater effort in understanding the role that family caregivers play and provide the instruction and support for the tasks that they're actually performing. As a caregiver, I can assure you that family caregivers can have a whole long list of things to worry about, from feeling undertrained for their constantly evolving roles to trying to stay afloat financially. And the feeling of isolation that so many caregivers experience only serves to amplify all of these worries. I know you've heard me say this before, but we have to do better. I'll include a link to this new report in today's show notes. speaking of being a caregiver, if you're a regular listener, then you know that my wife Jean is living with advanced progressive MS, and she's now being cared for in a subacute nursing facility. If you're not familiar with that term, a subacute nursing facility falls somewhere between a hospital and skilled nursing care. It's for patients who require a higher level of care or more specialized care than they would typically receive in a skilled nursing home. And since Jean has been in a nursing home, my role's transitioned from being her full-time caregiver to being her advocate. From time to time, I try to share our experiences that illustrate why that role, why being someone's advocate is important. Whether your family member is in a hospital, a nursing home, or any kind of care setting. So, a couple of weeks ago, I noticed that Jean's blood pressure and heart rate had increased. She wasn't experiencing any pain, and she didn't have a fever. And I remembered that when Jean was hospitalized just a few months earlier, she presented the same set of symptoms. Her blood pressure and heart rate had increased, but she wasn't running a fever. At the time of her hospitalization, it turned out that Jean had to be treated for sepsis. In other words, she had one or more infections that had progressed to the point where they became life-threatening. And I made a note to myself that she could apparently get to this point while her temperature remained normal. Waiting for the fever, which typically accompanies an infection, wasn't going to be a reliable way to determine whether Jean was dealing with an infection. So when I saw these symptoms again, I requested that Jean's doctor write an order for a full set of labs. After a few days, I was told that the lab had received a contaminated urine specimen, so they'd have to repeat the procedure, which they did. A few days later, I was told the same thing. Once again, the specimen going to the lab had been contaminated. Now, by now, more than a week had gone by since I had made my initial request, and when the nursing facility contacted Jean's doctor for another order for new labs, he no longer felt there was a need for them. When I checked with the nursing home about the status of getting this urinalysis done, they shared the doctor's decision with me. And I guess I had a different perspective about all this. Jean still had that same increase in her blood pressure and heart rate, and nothing had really changed or improved since I had made my initial request. I really wasn't sure what her doctor was thinking, but I advised the nursing home that all of the reasons that I had originally requested that a urinalysis be conducted still seemed to apply, and I asked them to relay my renewed request to her doctor. Following my request, which frankly wasn't so much a request as it was my expectation, Jean's doctor wrote a new order for urinalysis, and this time the results came back and showed that Jean was in fact dealing with an infection. And this time, her infection can be managed at the nursing home with antibiotics, instead of allowing it to simply get worse and eventually require hospitalization. And that, in a nutshell, is why it's so important for everyone living with MS, along with every other patient who's being treated in any kind of a care facility, to have someone advocating on their behalf. I can't tell you how many times I've been able to improve the quality of Jean's care simply by raising questions and refusing to be anything less than a full partner in her treatment. It's more work, it's more responsibility. Sometimes it's more to worry about. But when a discussion about treatment or a decision about a particular treatment leads to a better outcome for the person you're caring for, it reminds you of why you really couldn't do this any other way. Many people living with MS, Parkinson's disease, and other neurodegenerative diseases have some kind of speech disorder. And we know that speech disorders can be an early sign of cognitive decline. Yet today, the methods used by physicians to test for changes in language are limited to methods that lack precision and are prone to bias. But a research team in Toronto, Canada, think they have a better idea. They've developed a web portal called Talk to Me. That's TALK, the number 2, followed by ME. And the Talk to Me portal can gather a patient's language data by having the patient complete a variety of cognitive tasks on a computer or a tablet. And these are the same cognitive tasks that they would be asked to complete manually in a doctor's office. The difference here is that the patient's data is then analyzed using a form of artificial intelligence called machine learning. We've talked about machine learning before on the podcast, as it's proving to be a reliable tool in better diagnosing and predicting the course that a disease is likely to take. And in this case, the imprecision associated with identifying cognitive decline by analyzing language skills is being replaced by a reliable and accurate means of better identifying cognitive decline at its early stages, so that appropriate rehabilitative treatment can be proactively introduced, which ultimately means better outcomes and better quality of life for the patient. If you'd like to review the specific cognitive tests that are incorporated in the Talk to Me framework, along with all the details about this project, I'll include a link to the paper that explains it all in today's show notes. You know, so much of what we talk about on the podcast is, in one way or another, related to the fight to find a cure for MS. But when my guest, Yvette Brisco, talks about the fight to find a cure, well, she means it literally. In a moment, we'll meet MS activist and MS warrior, Yvette Brisco. Well, my guest today is Yvette Brisco. I met Yvette just a few weeks ago at the National MS Society's State Action Day in California. That's a day when MS activists have an opportunity to sit down with California state legislators and talk to them about the issues that are most important to families affected by MS. Yvette is an MS activist and she's an MS warrior. As a matter of fact, she's taken the fight to find a cure for MS literally, and I think I'm going to let her explain what that means. First, let me welcome you to the podcast, Yvette.
Thank you for having me. I think this is an amazing opportunity to just kind of share my story with people and hopefully inspire somebody to get on board with the fight themselves. So thank you.
Well, sure. And I thought we could start by having you talk a little bit about what you mean when you talk about the fight for a cure for MS.
Well, I am an official with the California Amateur Mixed Martial Arts Organization, and so I go around the northern part of the state. We're part of the sanctioning body for amateur mixed martial arts, and so because I operate in the fight world, when I was diagnosed with MS, I thought, let me marry my passion for MMA with this thing that I'm battling anyway, this disease, and use that as an opportunity to raise both awareness and funds for research and for, helping people who need help for services and things like that. And so some of the promoters who hold their shows up here in Northern California, I just approached them and I said, hey, can you do your show as a fight for a cure? And they said, yes. So now we set up shop at these shows and, we do raffles, we do auctions, and we raise money that we donate to the society or to other organizations that are providing services for people with MS. And then, I personally, my way of keeping fit, my way of maintaining, flexibility, of encouraging my body to do things I want it to do is to, get in the ring and maybe hit mitts or get on the mat and roll around with jiu-jitsu or wrestling or something like that. So that's my way of fighting MS. I'm not going to let it win. I'm going to fight it all the way.
And when were you diagnosed with MS?
2014. I was diagnosed in 2014. Yeah. And it came as quite a shock. I mean, I had had symptoms for a couple of years, but I attributed all of my symptoms to something else. So my arm would lift by itself, and I thought, oh, gosh, I have a pinched nerve. the extreme fatigue that I was feeling. I thought, oh man, I've been burning the candle at both ends. I must have lit it in the middle too. So that's what that is. And come to find out, that wasn't what that was.
So pre-diagnosis, what was your life like? What were you up to?
Pre-diagnosis, I was, again, working as an official in MMA and also a substitute teacher. I have 2 kids who are now adults, but I still had my daughter at home when I was diagnosed. My son had already gone off to learn his craft. And I was active in the community, working with different nonprofit organizations. I would do the cancer walk every year, working with disadvantaged youth, different activities like that. I think it's important for people to be civic-minded and to give back to the community in whatever capacity they can. And I think that they should do it in something that they are passionate about. And so since I have a variety of passions, that's kind of what I did. And then my passion kind of changed a bit with my diagnosis, and I started putting all of my energy and effort into the fight for a cure for MS.
I know as an MS activist, you're using your voice to raise awareness among our elected representatives about the issues that are important to everyone affected by MS. And as you've just said, I know you find it important for people to kind of get involved. And yeah, I know that you developed that passion at a pretty young age. I think you probably started out helping others when you were still part of a brownie troop. I know you went on to distinguish yourself as a Girl Scout. Can you tell me a little bit about that?
Sure. You went way back on this one. I did start as a brownie at 3rd grade, and in Girl Scouts, I did end up achieving the Gold Award and the Gold Leadership Award. Those are the 2 highest awards that you can receive in Girl Scouts, and it requires a lot of hours of community services, of learning different things, going out to help people. So I volunteered at our local hospital. I was a junior volunteer there. When I turned 17, I actually enlisted in the Army Reserves and thought that, if you're going to serve the community, serving your country is one of the biggest ways that you can do that. And so I felt that was important for me to be a part of something bigger than myself. And then when I got back, when that part was done, I had already started my family, and, I was a single mom raising 2 kids and trying to figure out where I fit in with all of the things that I wanted to do. And so I did a year of service as an AmeriCorps, and again, working with disadvantaged youth and trying to help them to learn values and how to make positive choices and things like that. And then substitute teaching was important to me because I was able to have an impact on kids' lives depending on how I interacted with them. And, I could do it not just in one school, in one classroom, but I get to move around and talk to lots of people about lots of different things and provide them with a perspective that they don't necessarily get from their full-time teachers. So, I think that everyone should give back. Everyone should pick a cause, whatever your cause is, and then give to that. If you don't have the financial means to give that way, you can give your time, because your time is worth something too. And you are able to make an impact when you raise your voice and allow it to be heard for whatever the issue is that promotes a better world so that we can all live in a better place.
Maybe this is a good time to ask you to share a little bit about what's important to you about being an MS activist, about choosing to use your voice and your time and your effort and your energy to really raise awareness and support the issues that make the world a better place for people living with MS. What's important about all that for you?
Well, I think that there are a few things that matter for me as far as that's concerned. One is that we have laws in this country that are supposed to sort of regulate how we do things to make sure that people are taken care of. And then there are many areas where that's lacking, where things have gone in a direction that I don't know if it was originally intended that way, but we need to be able to do things to bring that back around and to address the needs of the least of us as much as the most of us. And so being able to be an activist, being a district activist leader, and going out and talking to them and saying, hey, I don't know if you were aware of this, but this is what's going on in the MS community. This is what people with MS live with. This is what people experience, and this is how you can help. Because part of the problem isn't that they're cold-hearted or that they don't want to help, it's that they don't know how until you bring it to their attention. People who are not living with this disease and do not have a personal connection to someone who is don't know. And that's the bottom line. They don't know. And so if we don't go out and share our stories, and if we don't go out and point out the things that can really make a difference, then we are losing an opportunity for them to make those changes that are going to be so important. And so I think that that's part of my responsibility as a citizen. That's part of my responsibility as a person living with this disease who does have a voice. I use that voice to bring those things to their attention. And then there are other areas of awareness where I like to operate. I have an online series where I bring in people who are experts in the community or people who are living with the disease themselves, and we talk about it. We talk about the things that are important to people who have MS, where they can live better. But I don't just bring in, doctors and health coaches and things like that, therapists and that sort of thing. I've interviewed my daughter, and she talked about what it was like to be 16 years old and to find out that your mom has this incurable disease and now it's going to impact the way you live. I've brought in a communications person to talk about the conversations that you can have and how you can direct those conversations so that there's better understanding between you and people who don't know what it's about, and between you and your loved ones, so that you have a kinder, gentler way of communicating with each other and getting rid of the misunderstandings, so that that's one stress that's taken off of you when you have MS. Those kinds of things I think are important just as much as when we reach out to legislators and say, hey, you can change a law or you can create a new law to make a difference and to make it better.
So where can people find your online series?
So that is at beyondsurvivingtothrivingnow.com. And, we're right in the middle of our encore of season 2. And that's where we are, again, we're just, hardcore talking about what are the issues, let's dive deep, and what are the questions that keep people up at night.
Well, that's great. I'll be sure to include a link to that in today's show notes so people can find it easily. And let me ask you this. What would you say to someone who's living with multiple sclerosis? What would you say to them about becoming an MS activist? What will be their gain?
Don't hesitate, do it, because it's fulfilling in a couple of ways. It's fulfilling knowing that you are making a difference and taking a stand for everyone who has MS, but it also is empowering for you. When I started this journey and I thought about where am I going to go with it? Do I allow MS to control me, or am I going to get my MS under control? And being an activist gives me an opportunity to take control over another portion of my life where MS thought it was going to have it, and I said no. And so if someone wants to go and just allow themselves to develop, because not only are you speaking out and standing in your own power, but the fact that I'm an activist means that I'm learning about these bills that are available, that are being proposed, that are things that are going to make things better for people. I'm more informed. And so when I go out and I'm just having an everyday conversation with someone, I'm able to talk about the legislation that's being proposed and allowing that awareness to happen too. So if people want to go to the National MS Society's webpage, and there are links on there that talk about becoming an activist. Think about it in two ways. It's what you're doing for yourself, and it's what you're doing for everyone else who is living with this disease. So we can make a difference. So we can make inroads into the things that will make it better for everyone.
Living with MS presents anybody with what I'll call moments of frustration. And yet, you're the first one who's ever told me that to blow off a little steam, they just kind of step into the ring. Given that, talk to me a little bit. How long have you been involved in mixed martial arts?
So I think, well, I have to take this all the way back because, any of the combat sports are amazing for people with MS, honestly. And I was a mat maid when I was a sophomore in high school is when I started. I wanted to wrestle and my mom wouldn't let me. So I became a mat maid, which that's what we were called back then, but I think now they call them statisticians or scorekeepers or something like that. But I went everywhere with the wrestling team and I did get to practice. I just didn't get to compete. And that's what started me on the journey. And when I was in college and doing things with the national team for Greco-Roman wrestling, we did an international tournament here in California every year. And some of the guys that I met and interacted with who were on the Olympic team, they decided to go into mixed martial arts, and that's what started me off as a fan. And then once I actually got involved in the sport, that's when I said, hey, let me put some gloves on and see what this is really about. And some of the people that I was involved with in that capacity as an official really encouraged me to think about adding that as part of my own healthy routine and making sure that I take care of my body as much as I'm taking care of my mind, as much as I'm taking care of the internal parts of me in order to live better with the disease. So yeah, it's something I actually, I go and I have a treatment at Stanford, and then I go to the East Palo Alto Boxing Club and hit mitts or, whatever it is that they're working on that day. I head over there and get a workout in. And I mean, there are some days when I don't feel up to it, but the days that I do, then, I suit up, glove up and do my thing.
That's really great. So what is next? What do you have coming up in the near term, midterm horizon for you?
Well, I'm going to continue with our Fight for a Cure activities that we do because I feel like, that's an awesome way for me to raise funds for the cause. I also, as a health coach, I do have a program coming up to help people with their fatigue that they're feeling. And we're going to be beta testing the autoimmune energy fix in May. And so just a quick shout out, if I can, I'm looking for beta testers who are interested in getting some relief for their fatigue levels. And then just, talking to people, making those connections, networking with people who are living with MS and informing people who don't have it. I think that I'm going to stop talking about MS when I can no longer talk at all. I'm going to stop raising awareness when everyone on the planet knows or I'm no longer here. And so those are the things that are coming up for me. It's staying in the fight until the fight is won. And, I a lot of times when I'm talking to people, I tell them I'm living for the day when MS no longer stands for multiple sclerosis. I'm living for the day when MS stands for mystery solved. And until then, I keep going, I'll keep fighting, I'll keep talking, and I'll keep bringing the message along.
Well, good. It sounds like you and I are going to celebrate our retirement from the fight on the same day.
Right. Absolutely.
Well, I will make sure again to include some links in today's show notes so people know how to connect with you and what you're up to. I want to thank you for all of your fundraising and your activism on behalf of people affected by MS and really for being such a lifelong role model for making sure that part of your role is helping make our world a better place for others. And thanks so much for talking with me today.
Thank you for having me. It was an honor and a pleasure.
That's going to wrap up this episode of Real Talk MS. I hope you take just a couple of minutes this week to let me know why you'd be the perfect special guest for me to interview on our 100th episode. Just head over to realtalkms.com/enter and you and I might be having a conversation on Real Talk MS episode 100. I'm John Strum. Thanks for listening, and we'll catch you next time.